Check, check. Okay, beautiful. All right, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Radio Forward's yet-to-be-named podcast. I'm here with Adam Nayman, Professor Adam Nayman, who is a contributor to The Ringer, as well as author of books on the Coen Brothers, PTA, and David Fincher. I'm really excited to bring on a professional film critic, as well as UofT lecturer, as well as like how well this works out that we're at UTSC, site of Enemy, filming location of Enemy, which is something you teach in your class, the business of film. So I actually want to start there with this course. Kind of a meta question. I wanted to, so there's this famous, not famous quote, but it's just like a random YouTube video of Norman Finkelstein talking about his students being not well read. Like people come into, he's like an old man yelling at the sky, complaining about his students not reading books anymore. But I was wondering, how well read are your students in film? Like, is that something you've noticed? Is that something that's changed over time?
Right.
And do you find that there are like these archetypes of people's tastes? Like, is there a stereotypical film bro? Is there a Marvel fan? Is there like an art house Criterion collector?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think that when you teach, the main reading that you're concerned with is what you assign. And then the question becomes, how many kids do the reading? And I have the running joke in the business of film class I give is I sort of like, put your hand up if you did the reading. And my mental over-under is, 4 kids in a class of 40. Mm-hmm. And that's not because the readings are boring, and it's not because they're bad students, and it's not because the readings aren't interesting. It's because I think that idea of, even if it's online, I think like reading concentrated blocks of material is starting to disappear from the way certain courses are taught. It's starting to disappear from curriculums. It's starting to disappear from daily life. I think focus on every level is kind of distracted. I think we're at a moment where people watch movies on 2 times speed because they want the plot. They read summaries of movies on Wikipedia because they want the plot. Like Cliff Notes has always been like a cliche of study, right? Mm-hmm. Like give me the gist, give me the whatever. But the idea of reading something for more than content is, I think, disappearing a little bit. The reverse are the students who I know and the people I know who live in reading. They live inside those texts. They want to read the text. They want to read the annotations. They want to create annotations. Mm-hmm. So, I wouldn't generalize because there's always an exception to a rule. And also we kind of, see what we want to see sometimes, mm-hmm. and people can surprise you. But I do think when you're talking about the way that, let's say in a class of film students, which is the second part of your question, how do people present themselves as archetypes or types? This is a huge facet of film culture now.
Yeah.
The most omnipresent film accessory that I see, and I see it at concerts and I see it on campuses, the movie tote book.
The movie tote book. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, the movie tote bag, the blue tote bag.
Well, there's also a digital extension of your like film knowledge, and that's your Letterboxd profile and like your top 4 too, right?
Your Letterboxd profile, your top 4, people waiting in line to film themselves.
In the Criterion closet.
Yeah, in the makeshift Criterion closet. Typically when you go inside a van, it's because Buffalo Bill was trying to abduct and skin you, which is actually Silence of the Lambs, a Criterion film. But that idea of like distributors particularly, more than directors, distributors creating a brand identification, making it seem like their brand has to do with a lifestyle. If you drill down to the movies and watch the movies, you can still talk about the movies as art or text or, God forbid, as content. But whether it's A24 or Mubi or Criterion, they've really connected to that social media moment. People want to make themselves in the image of these distributors. Mm-hmm. A company like Criterion now uses A-listers kind of as clout. You get people into the closet. It makes the closet look like something cool, famous people want to be part of. Mm-hmm. And then the cool, famous people get the taste of picking Criterion movies. When Channing Tatum and Zoe Kravitz, they're not like the most famous people who went into the closet, but they may be the most attractive pair that ever went in there. And mm-hmm. It's such a desirable idea of like a celebrity couple. And they pick their favorite Criterion discs. I mean, it's a wonderful 2-way street. Criterion has A-listers in the closet, and the A-listers show that they have good taste. So I think that how does this all, relate back to a film studies classroom? Yeah, people bring in Mubi tote bags. or people bring in an A24 hat, or if they don't bring on a literal A24 hat, they're wearing a figurative one because they want to talk about A24. You know, there's all those T-shirts, the Girls on Top T-shirts from the UK, which is just you wear the name of a female director. You know, like you just have a shirt that says Elaine May or Sofia Coppola. And there's so many layers of semiotic meaning to that. You're wearing your favorite filmmaker, but you're wearing a female director because it's not a male filmmaker. And there's an implication about the canon there. And there's an implication about, you know, who gets to be a household name and why. I mean, in the books you mentioned on the Coens and especially on PTA, who I think is like the patron saint of that idea, a certain kind of film bro idea. He's a much more interesting artist than that. Yeah. But he's also someone, a lot of that accrues to him, and Fincher even more, Fincher equally so. Are you cheerleading and brand building by writing big collectible illustrated books about them, or are you trying to deconstruct where that cult of authorship comes from? A lot of people I know buy those books without reading them because they just like the idea of a big coffee table book with pictures from Paul Thomas Anderson films. I get royalties either way. But the content of the book, you know, should matter. So to tie that all the way back around to the idea of reading, I think sometimes reading can seem like a waste of increasingly precious and fragmented time to people because they know the broad strokes of stuff. And I think the broad strokes is much more about image and symbol and logo these days than it is about content. But it doesn't mean there aren't smart kids who do the reading. And sometimes they do the reading better than I do.
Yeah, it seems obvious that your class is coming in with this like semiotic display of film knowledge. So I wanted to ask you, when preparing a film for class, how does that compare? Like your viewing session itself, this is like a really meta question, but when you actually sit down to engage with a film, how different does it look when you're preparing a film for class versus preparing for an article on The Ringer versus an appearance on the Sleazoids podcast or, you know, the Hit Factory podcast, or just like watching a movie for fun?
I think it all starts with watching the movie, period. And there's all sorts of contexts in which you're going to watch a movie. You're watching a movie because you know you have to write about it that night. You're watching a movie because I know I have to read about it next week. You're watching a movie because your kids have put it on. You're watching a movie because your partner says, I would like to see this. You're watching a movie because it's 1 a.m. and you're grading papers and you want background noise. And sometimes you're watching something you're seeing for the first time. Sometimes you're watching something you've seen 100 times. And sometimes you're watching something you wish you weren't watching, right? So everything sort of comes out of that experience. I think one of the misconceptions people have, and sometimes it can be a very polite, interesting misconception in conversation, and sometimes it's at the center of the most obnoxious ways that people talk about this stuff online. It's like, well, can't you just enjoy something? Yeah. And what you sort of want to say back is you say, I don't understand how you're enjoying anything. Because different taste is fine, but the idea that you shouldn't think about what you're watching, that you shouldn't form opinions about your watching, that something is, quote, just a movie. I mean, I wonder if people understand how they sound. Yeah. Especially like discussing kids' films. Well, I think that's a huge. It's just let people enjoy things is another like such a common trope online, and it's let poisons the well of discussion a little bit. I mean, what I would actually say is that the phrase "let people enjoy things" is correct. So if someone wants to enjoy something by noting what it references in terms of other films or other art forms or history or culture or politics, if someone wants to enjoy something by trying to connect to the intentionality of the artist or taking the artist's intentionality away because they don't buy into auteurism and they don't buy into that idea, if someone wants to enjoy something because they find people or a person in a movie incredibly attractive, or people want to enjoy something because it reminds them of something personally, it's not so much that it's not like let people enjoy things, it's just when people are going to then talk about it, either writing or teaching or in conversation, do they have something interesting to say? And I think that if the asterisk you were to put on every line where someone says, don't you just enjoy something, if you could add an asterisk to that, which is, can't you just enjoy things? I am also not particularly interesting. Can't you just enjoy something? In light of the fact that I myself am not interesting and have nothing interesting to say about this, and I'm not interested to hear anything. And there's all sorts of reasons people don't want to read or hear discourse about a movie. It's not just spoilers. It's like people don't want to hear that that someone doesn't like what they like. And this is becoming the terrifying, tyrannical part of film culture, is that fans are not just like, disappointed. They'll actively seek out negative reviews and be like, you should probably be murdered.
Yeah.
What do you mean you didn't like this?
Right.
What person molested you? what is your family being held at gunpoint?
Right.
If you didn't like Ant-Man. And
I mean, I saw the responses that you were getting about Gladiator 2, and I think it's another part is like this discussion about the film politically and how it stands. If it's this is such a reductionist word, but if it's something is problematic, I mean that you are willing to discuss something in the context of what it's actually saying, like what the film is actually saying. Somebody is enjoying a film which is clearly has issues. It feels like a personal slight or attack on their character if they happen to enjoy that. I mean, I saw that post you made about Gladiator 2, and it was hilarious.
Well, people take it as a slight on their character, or more broadly, maybe on a community. Or I think that whole idea of communities is interesting in film culture too.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about
you have
students.
The individual makes up the consensus or a canon or a Rotten Tomatoes rating, right? Or the individual stands against it. And if anyone stands against it, people are like, this is more about the standing against it than what they have to say.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, what do people really want to say? Do they want to say, this got 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, I feel the same way? I mean, maybe they do. But the idea that people should want to feel the same way, the idea that like one rotten tomato, or moldy tomato spoils the bunch is a very new idea. There's a long history of what's the relationship between film criticism and publicity and marketing. Critic quotes go on posters if they like it. I guess you pick and choose which critics, like a particular movie. David Lynch very famously put Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs down on the poster for Lost Highway, which I thought was a wonderful, generous gesture. I mean, Siskel and Ebert's review of Lost Highway was stupid. Ebert was very dumb on Lynch up until the end when he finally liked Mulholland Drive. But I like the idea of 2 thumbs down as a kind of selling point. But then if you dig deeper, if you're the sort of person who goes around giving everything a thumbs down and saying everything's garbage because that's your critical armor or your critical performance, that's a drag too. Yeah. The very misunderstood figure who some of your readers, reviewers would do well to learn about why he's so interesting is Armond White. And the surface understanding of a critic like Armond White is he's the one guy who doesn't like anything.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not true. He likes a lot of things, and the reasons that he doesn't like things range from extremely perceptive, good faith takes from a guy whose subject position is really complicated. He's a black critic at a period where it was mostly white film critics. He has certain political leanings or views. He has questions of orientation and sexual desire that inform his work. Really, really interesting. Reducing him to a guy who just hates stuff because it's popular is a misunderstanding of an important American film critic. On the other hand, I read him now in the National Review and think about 80% of it is in bad taste. So it's this weird horseshoe theory where it's like he's not what people say he is, and I know this, but then the work bends all the way back around and becomes almost what people are saying he is.
Well, it's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, maybe.
Yeah, a self-fulfilling...
He feeds into it, perhaps.
Yeah, a self-fulfilling prophecy of contrarianism where it originally comes from a genuinely adversarial place, and then it sort of metastasizes into shtick. And, we all have shtick. Yeah. When I do Ringer podcast now, Sean Fennessy, who I like a lot, who I think is a really smart person and a good colleague, I owe him a lot. He picks up on the fact on Reddit that people think by the standards of Ringer that I'm mean. And so he plays the whole mean pod guy thing, and he means it very sweetly, and it's not and sometimes you play into it or sometimes not. But there's all different standards for this. I'll see people I get emailed out of the blue all the time at my UofT account, not just by nice people like you, but like random people like, how can I find Adam Nayman? Oh, he's at UofT. Let's just put his name in. And you see, I get emails from people who are like, why are you a piece of shit? Why are you a piece of shit? Why didn't you like this?
Crazy.
Why didn't you like this movie? Some of them are very nice. Yeah. A lot of them are not so nice. But what I sometimes want to say to the people, let's say the people who aren't just saying, why are you a piece of shit? But people are like, oh, why are you so academic? I want to say to them, I dare you, not because you're not smart enough, because it's not about smartness. I dare you to read 6 paragraphs of what academic film writing reads like. Yeah. Not so that you like it. You don't have to take anything from it. I often find like real academic jargon heavy writing to be next to worthless for me. But it's all relative. People think that what someone like I write or other critics for publications like Reverse Shot or the late lamented CinemaScope or all these other things that I think are just in a tradition of like good belletrist film criticism with real vocabulary and stuff. People find that academic. It's not. This is like popular, accessible, mainstream criticism. And I'm a pretty soft touch. I think I'm not tough enough compared to friends of mine. I have friends who look at my taste and they're like, what's with you? Like, why are you liking everything?
Yeah.
So it all depends on what cohort and community you operate in. That has way more to do with how you see a critic than with what that critic might actually be doing. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, I've tried to read On Cinema by Deleuze, and it's like incomprehensibly thick. And I mean, you get into deeper questions about like semiotics and like cinema as it stands in time and like how it captures a moment, and it gets very heady. But there is such a wide range of criticism. There's such a wide range of way that you can engage with cinema.
You mentioned Deleuze. I read Deleuze when I was an undergrad.
Yeah.
I don't teach the kind of courses where I have to teach him, and it's not out of any dislike for the material. I think it's brilliant material that even now I feel a mix of, inspired by it and also somewhat, intimidated by it.
Yeah.
I don't think that ever goes away. I think that people who are teaching theory, the second it becomes just kind of like a package that that's where you start to sound really boring when you're teaching it.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in, if I were to try and teach, say, Deleuze, or when you try and even teach something like the culture industry, which is like one of the big pieces I teach in the authorship class, the Adorno-Horkheimer Frankfurt School idea of, enlightenment as mass deception, and what are Hollywood movies telling people? And are they telling people what they want to hear, which is all written in the 40s and 30s? I'm like, if this becomes bullet points, the students aren't going to find it interesting. I'd much rather the students be confused by it and engaged than get the shorthand version whereby these paradigm-shifting pieces of criticism and theory become very easy.
Yeah.
Right? I also think that there's a huge difference between the way people speak in the academy, in journals and articles and lectures and faculties, and the way not normal, but the way people who aren't there talk about movies, which is very important because it's such a commercial art.
Yeah.
And you can completely stratify or insulate yourself to whatever degree you want. You can create an echo chamber where everyone thinks and talks the way you do, and you have fun arguments about little gradations of taste, which, by the way, is how I live a significant portion of my social and professional life, is with my friends who I respect and know enough to argue with. But that gets pretty stultifying after a while. Yeah. You kind of suffocate, So trying to belong to as many different communities as possible without like appropriating aspects of those communities, or without just like being I am a believer when it comes to anything, especially like film festivals and programming. If something's for everybody, it's for nobody.
Yeah.
If something's for absolutely everybody, it's for nobody. This is where you get the blandest, most anodyne crap ever.
Yeah.
Or, the ruling logic of certain recent election-losing political parties in an unnamed North American country, I mean, this whole idea of everything's good, everything's positive, we're kind of for everybody. So, you don't seem to be for anything.
Yeah.
So whether it's in film festival programming or partisan politics, you do need to take a stand at some point on something.
Yeah.
But you also want to question yourself about what that stand is. Mm-hmm. To go back to Armand, who, again, I think half the time is quite bad faith, but half the time always stops me in my tracks when I read it. His Twitter account has a quote from Godard, which is, "We have years of struggle ahead, mostly within ourselves," which I think is a great line. Has a very significant political context for Godard, May 68 and all that. But it's also just, how much do you actually struggle with your opinions? Do you struggle to articulate them, or do you just want to say this is good? Do you struggle with work you don't like by a filmmaker who you enjoy, or do you just write off those flaws as positives? I think if you're asking yourself those questions, whether you're publishing or not, you're doing the work of criticism. I think if you just want to like something because everybody likes it, or hate something because everybody likes it, or some variation thereof, that's a different impulse that you're kind of working out. It's usually not that interesting.
Right. before we get to an entire body of work from one director,
Sure.
one thing I really love about your criticism and your writing is your ability to create a through line between movies throughout cinema history.
Yeah.
And like name drop these like brilliant connections. Like, okay, there was a review that you wrote like briefly on Letterboxd about Terrifier 2, and that you said you wouldn't go as far as some other critics as to make a connection between Charlie Chaplin's
Little
The
Tramp, yeah.
and Art the Clown, but you have made some really interesting connections. I have one written here. You've talked about Kurosawa's Chime in relation to Jacques Tati's Playtime,
Right.
and I thought that was so interesting because they both kind of use their environment to create, for lack of a better word, a vibe that the characters are kind of influenced by.
Certainly.
It seems like the characters in both Chime and Playtime are just gears or cogs of their environment, and so much of like the whimsy in in Playtime and like the absolute dread and horror of Chime, it's all encompassing and like the characters can't escape it. But like
There's a line about Jacques Tati. You can fix it in post. I think it's Michel. It's either Michel Simont or Michel Chion. I think it's Michel Simont because he wrote on Tati. He says, "Life is full of homages to Jacques Tati."
yeah.
What a line!
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That life seems to pay homage to a filmmaker's work, which means that filmmaker seems to reflect something true about life.
Right.
But Tati's not a realist. He's
No.
a slapstick formalist whose movies are about as far away from naturalism as possible. So to say that life has homages to this filmmaker, what does it mean? It means he's getting at something, especially in Playtime, about the kind of mechanized, systematized quality of life under modernity, technological modernity, capitalist modernity. And as you say very rightly, it's a movie that has whimsy, but underneath that whimsy, I think there's a deep sense of terror.
Yeah, right.
And it's a terror that relates back to, actually, of all people, Charlie Chaplin, because Playtime,
Modern Times.
Yeah, Playtime is in the same line as Modern Times, and I would say that Modern Times as a phrase would be a great title for a book on Kiyoshi Kurosawa, because this is a filmmaker who, to me, not only does reality make itself an homage to Kiyoshi Kurosawa, this is why we're fucked, because this is a guy who understands the nature of self-interest. Self-interest under capitalism, but also self-interest in a deeply, deeply hardwired way, where everybody wants what they want and they just want to construct various kind of systems of belief or excuses or permission to do these kind of subconscious things. For anyone listening to this, Kiyoshi Kurosawa is a Japanese filmmaker, no relation to Akira Kurosawa, but to me belongs in the canon as much, and that's a high compliment.
Yeah.
There's room for two Kurosawas when we're talking about
For
the
sure.
greatest movie makers of all time. And there's a movie that Kiyoshi made, which is not considered one of his greatest, but I love it very much, called Charisma, which is probably the only movie ever about a kind of like apocalyptic tree. Like literally, this is about a tree. I'm not a metaphor, like a tree in the forest that drives a character mad. And there's a line in that movie, it's sort of repeated as a mantra. It's called "Rewrite the Rules of the World." I never stop thinking about this line in relationship to Kurosawa and in relationship to everything. So it's like, rewrite the rules of the world. Great. What are the rules of the world?
Well, that's film. Film is such a medium to play around with that, right?
He rewrites the rules of the world. He redraws the world. He redraws it as a mirror that looks almost exactly like the real thing, but it's a mirror and it's distorted just enough.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't Lynch kind of do that too with, his paranoias about the suburbs or like Todd Haynes' Safe. I think that's probably...
Well, Todd Haynes' Safe is great. That's like an ambient eco-horror movie.
Yeah, but...
And then this year you had Ryosuke Hamaguchi's Evil Does Not Exist.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome.
A student of Kurosawa's, literally,
Yep.
took classes with him, who makes, in a very Japanese way and in a very different part of the world, a movie that would be a great double bill with Safe.
Yeah.
So this is why your original question, which was all about name dropping and connections, this is what we've just done. And it makes the movies so much bigger and more interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not always a case of direct connection. I mean, when I talked to Kiyoshi Kurosawa this year at TIFF, which is a great honor, I've interviewed him before. I would consider that not an assignment. That's an honor to be in a room with someone like that and talk to him. You know,
For the record, I consider this an honor.
Well, you know, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, great artist. You talk about the movies that influence him. He would never say, these are my influences, or that's directly about that. That sometimes says more about the reviewer's frame of reference, you know? And there are whole major movies that are important where the frame of reference, I can't imagine what the movie's like without them. I can't begin to say how weird it is to me that a movie like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood makes $400 million. And that's not because it's bad. It's because it's basically people sitting around talking about 60s network television pilots. I'm going to guess Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Tarantino movie, is a movie most people listening to this have seen compared to the other ones. And because DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are in it and because it's Tarantino, it feels like an obligation to see it. Yeah. But what is it actually about? It's insane how obscure and weird and personal to really no one that stuff is. Yeah. But Tarantino created this idea in the 90s where you either got his frame of reference or you pretended to, and then that became the whole reason he became this great postmodernist filmmaker. When I was 13 watching Pulp Fiction, I didn't know what all these references were from.
Right.
It was sort of like the flip side to The Simpsons, where the references in The Simpsons are all things you kind of grew up on and you see them on the show and you're like, I get that.
Yeah.
Tarantino, the people in their 30s and 40s, if you read what grown-ups said about Tarantino in the 90s, they're like, none of this shit is new. Yeah. And it's deeply, deeply cynical that he's acting like he invented these things.
Yeah, right.
But when you're 15, which I think is the perfect mental age for Pulp Fiction, and that's a compliment.
Yeah.
It's a compliment. It's perfect mental age for Pulp Fiction when you're 15. Sure. You feel like even if this stuff refers to something before it, it's like he's inventing it. And that's what really great.
But it's not just his personal attitude towards having like theoretically invented something. It's something about the movie itself that makes it feel like he's inventing, or he pretends like he's inventing something for the first time. But what is that like? Because a ton of movies make references to culture and to other movies before them, but a lot of them do it in like respectful and not just respectful, but like thoughtful ways. What is it about the references that you're talking about now that make them just so obviously I don't know, just platitudes, or just like, oh, I know what that means. You know, I know what that reference is.
Well, what does it say that the great film meme of the last 5 years, which was devised by a UofT student, by the way, I'm giving a shout out to a good pal of mine, Anna Swanson, who was an MA at UofT, the Leo pointing meme, you know, where he sees himself on TV
that's what
Tarantino.
I was doing. Yeah.
That's not just a good synecdoche of what Tarantino does. Yeah. I think it's what a lot of us want from film going. You could just have the same line from the Marvel movie where Captain America goes, I understand that reference.
Right.
It's two sides of the same coin. Yeah. And Tarantino has a cinematic universe like Marvel. It's just kind of where cool people hang out to get high instead of your coworker goes to sort of like be a normie loser, you know? And both of those things are big cliches.
Yeah.
You know, to quote someone else, another friend of mine who's also a critic who passed away, someone who I wouldn't consider a mentor, but he was older than me and a very good friend of mine based in Toronto, a guy named Kevin Currier, who's one of my best friends. He always had mixed feelings about Tarantino, but he was himself a huge fan of Godard. And what he said is that Godard turns viewers into film critics and Tarantino turns film critics into fanboys. And I think that that's a great observation, which is that with Godard, the references force you to look them up or find them or figure out your relationship to them. I think Tarantino, who's about as good at it as anyone has ever been, does things to make you want to be on the inside of that coolness. And right in between Godard and Tarantino is a director who I like at least as much as Godard, more than Tarantino, and who I am engaged in a lifelong discussion with about what do the references mean, which is De Palma. Because the easiest way to look at Brian De Palma is as a guy who's just restaging scenes from Hitchcock movies, and the interesting way to look at him is, well, why? What does it mean to restage a scene from a Hitchcock movie? Is he out of ideas? Or is he having ideas about stuff that we have all seen? If you rework the shower scene from Psycho, you are not stupid. You know people are going to say, well, this is from Psycho. Obviously, he must be derivative. He's not derivative. It's kind of like taking this basic source text that everyone knows and saying, well, how does it signify now? And so the reference-heavy filmmakers who I'm interested in, or the ones who are engaged seriously with a lineage of cinema, whether it's a Brian De Palma or a Kiyoshi Kurosawa or, take your pick, Spike Lee, the way that he engages with imagery from D.W. Griffith in a movie like Black Klansman, what's the reference and then what's the investigation? What's the interrogation? And also, are you interested in a world outside the realm of movies? I love that when Tarantino – I don't love this. I'm ambivalent about it. When Tarantino makes period pieces, they are all period pieces to the extent that they are about movies about that period or movies from that period. Social reality is something he is very loath to take on and deal with. That's his choice as an artist. But what does it say that he's an artist who becomes inflated and raised beyond all others in the last 30 years? Most important American filmmaker of the last 30 years, not a compliment. Something you have to deal with and think about and work through. But the fact that his movies are entertaining or funny or violent, I mean, if that's all you want to see or say about them, it's fine. I don't think that's that interesting. I think what's underneath those surface qualities versus other filmmakers who've done things that he's done, other postmodernists, other kind of, filmmakers who are trying to mobilize references in art and history to say something. I think he's more, to use your word, like problematic. And that's not a politically correct problem with his movies. Yeah. It's a critical way of looking at him.
You've mentioned in the past feeling ambivalent about PTA. At the beginning, like as these movies are coming out and you're seeing them for the first time and getting this instinct that they are just derivative, going back to what we were talking about previously, that they were just signifiers for the sake of signifiers. They were just, making references to films without a deeper connection to current culture or whatever period that they're in. But it seems like there is a transition that happened with PTA, or maybe the same transition happened with Fincher. And as auteur's filmography gets larger, and you have more information to make a cohesive thought about like all of their films together rather than the films individually. Like, how does that transition work? How does that process work when you're writing a book or you're writing a retro about an entire filmmaker's filmography? Like.
Well, when I saw There Will Be Blood, which is not in any way a revelatory movie that belongs solely to me, I think a lot of people felt a sense of revelation when watching it, because it's very good. And I don't think it's flawless. And there are other movies by him that I like more, but I think it's good. And yet when I saw it when I was 26, I fought it for 2 hours. I fought it because I fought against it. I was like, I see where these images come from. I see the genre he's working with. I see the intention in making Daniel Day-Lewis sound like John Huston from Chinatown. I see shooting in where George Stevens shot Giant. Is this a totally normal response to a movie? No, it's the response of someone who watches a lot of movies, who's kind of about to write about it, but also someone who felt very skeptical about this filmmaker. And the moment in the film, I write about it in the book, I've talked about it elsewhere, when the young kid, H.W., and his sort of young female friend, Mary Sunday, they take the jump off the porch. And they jump off the porch out of frame. It's a frame within a frame. The widescreen aspect ratio gets framed off because you see the doorway. It's very Fordian. They jump off. And then the camera catches her hand coming up into the wedding ring, and you've had this ellipsis of time. At that point in my critic-going brain, I'm like, oh, that's from 2001. That's an ellipsis in time. And then I'm just like, stop. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it's a compression of time in a way that serves the story. And it's shocking, given how the movie is paced and how it's treated time. And I'm like, how am I losing time with these characters? How am I losing time in this story? What just happened? Where am I now? What happened to Daniel Plainview? Where are we? And I thought it was such an incredible use of ellipsis, such an incredible gesture, that not only did I stop fighting the movie, I was sort of just in it and felt incredibly strongly. And it even carried me through my doubts about the ending, because I don't think the last 10 minutes of There Will Be Blood are my favorite part of the movie, even though they're very iconic. So that's a description of how in real time I found myself kind of rewiring towards a filmmaker. But when I saw The Master, his next film, which came out in the context of There Will Be Blood being kind of a hit and kind of an Oscar nominee, and to use your own cliche and archetype, because I'm not going to use it, but it's like a film bro starter pack movie, which means a lot of people would push against it for those reasons, because there's a lot of pushing for it, you know?
Yeah.
Then I watched The Master, which in the first 10 minutes, I think alienates about half the people who love There Will Be Blood, because all that long, clean classicism is gone. And you have a movie that is just made up of connective tissue. This is a movie that just feels synaptic, you know? So that one gesture in the epic of There Will Be Blood where time suddenly disappears and you can't understand the way the narrative's being told, The Master starts that way and holds that for 2 hours. And that's when I'm like, okay, this guy's amazing. What he's doing is amazing. And the image, you know, the texture of the cinematography is similar to There Will Be Blood. Maybe the pomposity of it, you know, the big Johnny Greenwood score and the A-list actors is still the same stuff that a lot of people would react against. But I'm like, no. I'm in this sensibility now. And it's not good just because it's purely his, because I like lots of movies where people are like operating the sensibilities of other filmmakers. The Master, I was sort of like, oh, this is his own thing. And then when I went back and watched Punch Drunk Love, another film bro starter pack movie, you know, there's a whole film that was made in Toronto a couple of years ago by Chandler Levac called I Like Movies.
I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, but a kid who's obsessed with Punch Drunk Love. But I went back and watched Punch Drunk Love, and I'm like, oh, I was the problem. I was the problem here. I was pushing against this movie instead of riding the flow and the slipstream of what he's doing. And that's where you kind of submit to the auteurist impulse, and hopefully not dishonestly. You're like, oh, everything I thought was bad is good. But when you connect to an artist's sensibility and you feel proprietary over it, or you feel really, really kind of taken by it, it's hard to not do that. I still don't like his first 3 movies as much as I like the subsequent ones. And I'm very clear about that in the book.
Which is what, Hard 8?
Hard 8's fine. Boogie Nights, parts of it are very bad. To me. And then Magnolia is a mixed bag.
Really? Wow.
But I would say the movies after that are all to greater or lesser degrees deeply interesting to me. And you know, he's gone from a filmmaker in my early 20s who it felt very important to kind of squint at, because it's like, oh, if you buy what he's selling, you know, you're selling out Robert Altman, or you're selling out Alan Rudolph, or all the directors who go into making him. I watched The Master, and you could name 15 movies that are in that movie, but it is purely his. Yeah.
So, okay, I get into film, and all of these films have already come out. So he's my basis auteur, right? And then I watch Babylon, Damien Chazelle, and I'm like, oh, this is PTA. So this is a never-ending cycle of references. And my original basis, my, I guess, education in film, whether it's self-guided or, you know, I really took the time to learn about film and film history, and went back, and now I've seen films from like every decade pretty much. But at first, like, this is my auteur. Like, this is my basis, right? And so I see Babylon, and I have the same instinct.
Well, I think the important thing, and it's a good instinct, the important thing is to sort of say, who are your gateways?
Yeah.
Are you going to let them lead to the predictable places? Or are you going to let them take you to the unpredictable places? It's like drug use, you know, like what's the safe gateway? What's the not safe gateway? And also, are you going to sort of look beyond certain canons? I think that a director like Anderson, who, again, for anyone listening, I wrote a 70,000 word book on that I'm very proud of, in which I teach at a university course. You know, in some ways there's a danger with a book like that, because a book like that makes claims. I don't think they're outlandish. I think they're very measured, but it kind of makes claims that his authorship and his films are kind of monumental and interesting. And I think that the idea of reading that and purchasing that and watching that can kind of make you feel like you've kind of conquered something. It's like, well, this guy's as good at doing it as anybody, so I'm good. Why would I want to watch anything else? And I think that there is a strain of authorship and auteurism that accrues glory to the monumentalist filmmaker, the controlling filmmaker, the anal retentive, micromanagerial filmmaker. It's also an excuse to forgive all kinds of bad and monstrous behavior, because perfectionists tend to be monstrous.
Yeah.
And monstrous perfectionists tend to be men. And I'm not saying that with any skepticism. I'm saying authorship is one monument among many that could use to be chipped away at. So when I teach Anderson at UofT, in the authorship course, I teach him with the Coens, who I like more than I like him. They're my great teenage love affair with movies, and it's continued into middle age because I think they're actually geniuses when they work together. But when I teach them, I teach everything wrong with them. I'm like, what are the strongest arguments against these filmmakers? And not so we can push them aside.
No, so it can illuminate what makes them great, right?
What did critics of color say about the Coens never dealing with race?
Yeah.
What have female critics said about Anderson's gender politics? What did filmmakers who encountered the Coens not when they were 15, but critics who encountered the Coens in their 40s who had seen everything Joel and Ethan Coen had seen, what did they say about him? You know, what's interesting about the Coens is if you read the really good film critics, and I'm showing my hand in who I think are great film critics, but Jay Hoberman, Jonathan Rosenbaum, Dave Kerr, they're great people who in some ways I've gotten to meet and work with a couple of them. That's the starstruck thing for me.
Yeah.
You know, if I email with Dave Kerr about the new Zemeckis movie, I'm like, how did I get here, you know? But their take on the Coens in 1984 was these guys are the end of movies. These guys are the blankest, most meaningless pastiche of everything that's come before.
Wow.
They're the blankest, you know, emptiest reproduction of Wells and film noir and whatever else in Kubrick. And then 40 years later, the Coens are like the last classicists left, and we fucking need them to get back together. I never use the "we are so back" meme. You know, when the Coens, when Joel and Ethan make their next movie, I will be posting "we are so back" every day. How far have we strayed from God's light? How far have they strayed? So that I mean, they haven't made a movie together in, you know, since Buster Scruggs.
Yeah,
and I don't think they've made a movie commensurate with how truly great they are since Llewyn Davis. My point being, this is how time works. You read the reviews of the Coens in the 80s, what you want to say to these guys, because they're all around for it 10 years later, just wait for Pulp Fiction. You guys think that movies are
it's the end of time in history?
Are spiritually impoverished now? Wait for this, because Quentin Tarantino's like the Coens if they'd never read a book.
Sure.
The Coens references are literary, and now Tarantino looks like what he is, which he's also like kind of a genius. I mean that. I like the word. I mean, I'm kind of the one doing it. I like that Tarantino's at the center of this because he's where so much of the behavior you're asking about comes from.
Yes,
the fanboyism,
right.
The tribalism, the allegiance, the don't say anything bad about this guy, or the, oh, if you don't like this stuff, you're just, you know, being too woke or whatever. I mean, Tarantino is a huge shifting figure. And then you mentioned Damien Chazelle. So it's like people are arguing now that Chazelle is going to look like what have we lost in 30 years? And as you get older, you get harder and harder to see that. Where like, I will let Robert Altman teach me how to watch Paul Thomas Anderson, and I guess I will let Paul Thomas Anderson teach me how to watch Damien Chazelle. I cannot imagine letting Damien Chazelle teach me to watch something in 30 years. But luckily, I'll be dead, you know? But you also have something like The Brutalist, which is coming out now, which is the most—
super excited.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the most transparent and easily mockable version of this idea.
Really?
Because Brady Corbet is like 36, and he's like, if I just make a movie, this isn't why he made the movie, but it's like a movie about an architect trying to build something big and that will endure, and he's fighting with the people who financed it, and it's all about like genius under pressure. It's a self-portrait. And everything in it is taken, to me, from Paul Thomas Anderson and James Gray. It's taken from them. The people who criticized Anderson and Gray back in the 90s, 2000s said they stole from everybody else. So is this just the cycle of film history, or is it diminishing returns? I will say this. There are an awful lot of 20-year-old boys at UofT very interested in The Brutalist, and I want to say to them, oh, are you very interested in like brutalist architecture? Really interested in the Hungarian Jewish experience? No, it's because it's an A24 movie. It's because it's an A24 movie where all the rhetoric around it is that it's 3 hours long and shot with lenses and the guy had final cut. That's the seductive myth of a movie like The Brutalist. I'm not even crapping on the movie, but I'm just saying that idea of construction and architecture and master building and some genius dude being in control of all of it, people are just creaming themselves over this. They're creaming themselves over it as an idea before watching the movie. And I promise you that when I publish a review of The Brutalist, which would be a mixed review in the Ringer in a couple of weeks, or when anybody publishes a review of it, if they don't like it, we're going to be back to the very first thing that we talked about, which is why are you spoiling everybody's fun? And who are you to not like this movie?
Yeah. No, there's some self-reflection I need to do, because the things that you mentioned, it's not necessarily that it's A24, but all of those things about, oh my God, I can't wait to watch it on film.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I literally am going to look for a screening of the movie that is on film because it's that the idea of it just is like sounds appealing to me. And that
Who are the loudest advocates for celluloid now are the filmmakers who we've been talking about.
Yeah.
You know, Anderson and you know, your Christopher Nolans and
I was going to
whatever
ask you
else.
about that actually. Do you think about technical aspects of the films anymore or at all?
I do, except when I don't.
Okay. So I was gonna make an example, like the Holdovers.
Sure.
I thought that first of all, it's a filter, right?
Yeah.
It's shot on digital, but there's like a film filter, film grain filter. But actually, I think it serves the the period piece-ness of the film, and I think it gives it like a cozy atmosphere, and I think it actually like serves a purpose. Like, do you ever consider things like that when you're reviewing something?
Sure, because you know there's you can have a fully realized aesthetic, and then you know is that aesthetic do something to bring something out of the material? Is it in tension with the material? Is it a degree of difficulty feat in and of itself? You know, there's a wonderful Korean director, Hong Sang-soo, who's sort of a director who's the received wisdom on him is that, you know, he makes one movie a year and they're all kind of exactly the same, but the surface variations are interesting. So you can pick your comparison who that's like.
Wait, what's one of his films?
Like, I mean, he's made like 36 movies in the last 34 years, but you know, Woman is the Future of Man, Tale of Cinema, Right Now, Wrong Then. He made a movie recently called In Water, which is shot almost completely out of focus, or the use of focus, let's say, is extremely uneven throughout the film. And it's an aesthetic that's so noticeable that it doesn't just become distracting. It kind of becomes the movie's reason for existing. So it's like, do you reduce it to a gimmick? Do you expand it to a worldview? Is there fun in just experimenting? Are you experimenting for the sake of it? And if you are, what's wrong with that? I mean, there's this bad idea that movies are stories, which is not true except when it is.
Yeah, I mean, it discounts like formalist films, right?
Formalist aims or non-narrative approaches to cinema, or stories that don't seem to have shape or manifest shape in different ways. And I perjure myself by saying that because some of the movies I like the most, I love because they are a well-told story and because you get the incredible satisfaction of the movie being shaped that way. But there's all kinds of ways movies can be shaped. There's all kinds of ways to tell a story. There's all kinds of reasons to not want to tell a story and to subvert the satisfactions of storytelling. So that's sort of the same thing about being awake and alive and aware to as many different kinds of movies as possible. If you find the sort of thing that you like, that's fine. And if you want to watch that same sort of thing over and over, I rewatch movies relentlessly.
Yeah.
And sometimes the movies that I rewatch are not very flattering, or else I hope people understand. Like I watch probably parts of David Wayne's They Came Together once a week because it's the funniest movie I've ever seen. This is the fake romantic comedy with Paul Rudd and Amy Poehler, which I think is a towering masterpiece, even though it's like 70 minutes long and really stupid. That's about fandom and pleasure and comfort.
Sure.
And being a critic doesn't mean
that goes away.
That goes away. In fact, it can kind of heighten it.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, also recognizing, you know, the Criterion Closet's a great metaphor because it's like a place you want to just like hide and stay in there with the stuff you like.
Yeah, right.
You know, good to investigate other closets, or good to at least think about your own closet and what goes in it. And I recognize that this is not the way a lot of people approach film going, which is fine. But the space that you write in is your space. And there's really, really awful, pretentious, high-handed ways to write. And I'm often accused of that. I don't think that's what I'm doing. Trying to meet the viewer on a mix of like my terms and terms that I think are kind of fair. That's not how I might have a conversation with friends. But anytime I write, it's trying to go from the entry point of like, I think everybody's perfectly smart. And let's just try and think this through the way I would think it through, and let's have a conversation about it.
Well, you were saying you have these relationships with other critics that you can kind of poke them with an argument or something like that. It's not the same sort of conversation you would have in this medium or with your audience in a film criticism.
Yeah, I mean,
journal, right?
I mean, the thing is that enjoyment isn't something that can be quantified. You never really try and tell people that, you know, I don't think you really like that. That's the really schoolyard playground tenor of a lot of the criticism about criticism. Oh, you're just saying that. You didn't really enjoy that. No one could enjoy that. You're saying you enjoyed that for clout, or you're saying you enjoyed that to seem smart. I don't know. I mean, I guess people do that sometimes. I know that when I was a teenager, I overestimated my thoughts about certain things because you want to seem informed.
No, what teenager doesn't do that, right?
What teenagers do. I mean, to me, that's a part of growing up.
Yeah.
And I do think that falling in love, I mean, whatever my feelings on Pauline Kael, and they're very mixed, the way that she personified through the titles of her books and sometimes through her discourse about movies, it was a romance, it was an infatuation, it was a physical relationship, it was a spiritual relationship. She was disappointed by movies the way we're sometimes disappointed by lovers or by friends, or she wanted to share her experience of a movie because, she was just so excited and turned on by it that she wanted it to be there. I think that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. I also think that a more dispassionate, clinical, objective lens, or even the Bordwellian way of looking at movies sometimes by just looking at structures and measuring shot lengths, you can do that too. You just don't want it to become that version of it. If something's for everybody, it's for nobody. You do put down certain lines in the sand, right? Mm-hmm. So even just in our very chill talking about directors we like, I like the Coens way more than I like Quentin Tarantino. I like Elaine May way more than I like Neil Simon. I like, the movie One False Move a lot more than I like Sling Blade. You find these little dichotomies and you use them to build out taste.
Right.
But you got to be able to question and change and finesse that
100%.
Taste and not just be stubborn.
The biggest medium by which people engage with criticism is obviously Letterboxd, and reducing, I mean, not critics, I'm saying regular people who just are watching movies but keeping track of what they like. I mean, it's always existed. There's always been IMDb or whatever, and people have made top 10 lists since literally the beginning of time. But just reduce avoiding this habit of reducing the film to a number rating is something I'm always trying to escape, and engaging with something besides my immediate thought is this a 3-star? Is this a 4-star? Is this in my top 5? Escaping this.
Well, it's because it's hard. It's a hard exercise. What are you going to do? Make a list of your 10 most mid movies?
Yeah, right.
You're going to make a list of, the 10 directors I'm indifferent to.
Yeah. I mean, there's a 3-star movie I've enjoyed more than other 3-star movies, but it's so reductive, right?
And I think that people, as you say, people have always done this, but that idea of performing our taste. And movies are particularly, movies and TV, it's interesting that people don't seem to have the same need to canonize and rank TV. They have very unhealthy relationships with TV, parasocial standing of, I ship this couple or, I want to be this person. And I think the lines between TV and film blur in interesting and non-interesting ways. But one of the reasons I like movies is because they don't inherently defer to the shape of here's some more. And serialized narrative, here's some more is wonderful when it's good.
Yeah.
But also here's some more is that's just where diminishing returns and cynicism come from.
Sure.
Anytime I see a good TV show, I want it to be canceled so it can be more like a movie. Like Mindhunter has 2 great seasons, it'll never get bad, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I feel you.
But I feel that canonizing movies, and look, you exist on social media, people make lists of everything.
Yeah.
NBA players, pop musicians. But movies are really seductive for this because the art synthesizes all the other art, and kind of saying the greatest such and such movie of all time, it kind of feels like that is the top of the artistic monolith because everyone will have heard of it.
Right.
It's different than ranking abstract expressionist painters
or
architects
or albums. I think one of the biggest differences in ranking films like this compared to music, and this goes back to making a through line through history of cinema history and compared to music history, because this is where I started. I started with album reviews, rate your music, just charts, topsters, and music was my big thing before I got into film. The language of music, trying to imagine showing somebody from the 1920s a death metal album, I think it does not compute in the same way that maybe showing a modern noir would in the 20s, in my opinion. I think that the language of film and across genre is actually a lot more similar than the language of music. Maybe that's not such a mind-blowing point or anything like that, but it's more so like that's why like this Apple Music top 100 ranking was, or any sort of music ranking at the end of year ranking doesn't compute in my head as much as film rankings do. I don't know what you think about that.
I think you're right. And I think that there's a lot of things about music that make it personal in different ways than movies are. You can have all kinds of experiences when watching a movie, but chances are the experience subsumes the movie in that case. Where people are like, oh man, I hooked up to that movie, means it's more about that experience of the whatever than the movie. That's the whole that's the whole idea of Netflix and chill.
Yeah.
And then I guess
and content as film too, right?
Where Criterion Channel and chill, I guess, is Netflix and chill for pretentious people, right?
Right.
But with music, it really can be the soundtrack to things.
Yeah.
And I find almost now that movies and music alike, it's like if you focus on them, people are accusing you of being like a complete nerd, like actually pulling lyrics apart in a song or pulling camera movement apart. People assume that it's too much. But I think it is easier to apprehend that idea of technique in movies because movies are stories and songs are kind of something else. I also think that movies appeal to people who are, in a way, locked in away from the physical, whereas I think a lot of music depends on physicality, the expression of dancing and movement and
instruments themselves.
Instrument themselves. I think that like both things can be very passive, but I think movies are passive in a different way. It's easier to intellectualize about them.
Right.
But the intersection of pop and movies is very interesting, and I think that movies have done a lot to inscribe that idea that pop music writes history, because so many of our images of the past come from movies, and then what music do we kind of associate them with?
Right.
Which is why, in a very different context, but at TMU, I sometimes teach a class on satire, and we talk about, I don't know why in a class on satire this is one of the things I always teach, but we talk about the Vietnam War as represented in popular culture and as a kind of fulcrum for all kinds of social dissent and pushback. And students don't really know the socio-political conditions of the Vietnam War, and why should they? Because it's not like it was when I was 20, when that was 30 years ago. I mean, it's literally coming on 60 years now.
Yeah.
But they know the soundtrack. They love the Family Guy joke, where everyone's Vietnam flashbacks are just hearing Fortunate Son by Credence,
right.
which, comes from Forrest Gump and from movies of that period and wherever else. So, all these things kind of work in harmony to make up kind of the personal taste matrix that people have. When you're talking about ranking albums too, I find that disappears too, because what's an album now? And that's why there is a church and state separation in most of the film rankings between movies and TV, where people, if they try and bring TV into it, people are like, get the fuck out of here. There's these weird things that challenge it.
There's a huge pushback for Letterboxd. Please never include TV.
But like with music, unless you're going to do things that like the Paz and Jop poll used to do, the Village Voice, where you rank albums and singles, which makes sense.
Yeah, right.
I just think that people are still kind of holding the line that movies aren't TV and movies aren't content.
Right.
The idea that music is albums now is really passé.
Uh-huh.
We are in the culture of the single, or like just the micro part of the single.
Which part in the concert do people know the TikTok sound of?
Yeah, the TikTok sound of, and that's not quite happened to movies totally. Yeah,
right.
In the last 2 or 3 days.
They're making discussions about it, though. They're talking like, studios are talking about music or movies as content or second screen movies, right?
Yeah, well, and I'm the ideal audience for second screen movies because 60% of the time I'm so tired after a day of writing, reading, teaching, parenting. My wife and I want to put something on, and even if it's a movie, I have my phone. And
right.
I have a whole category of movies where you're like, what can I afford to watch while it's on my phone? And I try to not make that something I'm writing about.
Right.
Or if I end up on my phone, it's a pretty good sign that when I go back to writing about it, this is not very good, And I don't bring my phone out at the theater, of course.
Right. What are you, psychopath?
Yeah. The way that a couple friends of mine have described A Juror Number 2, the new Eastwood film, is
I love that movie. It was awesome.
Terrific. It's a terrific movie. People, my wife included, but people who've watched it at home, no phone. Not like they had to put the phone out of the room, but they kind of watched it and they just felt no need to look at their phone. It's like, what is this?
Oh, interesting.
What is this weird sensation of being totally invested in the narrative world of this film? And you're telling me that this was made by a 94-year-old, and you're telling me that Warner Brothers doesn't want to put this movie out because their CEO is an absolute vile piece of shit, which he is. And then it's almost like, is that just reactionary thinking? Is wanting a movie-shaped object that runs 2 hours and tells a moral tale from left to right, like, are we happy to have that back? Or is this where we get Make Things Great Again from? I remember when La La Land came out, Damien Chazelle, my colleague Michael Koreski at Reverse Shot, he scored the rhetorical coup of the year where he said La La Land wants to make movies great again. And that's not because Damien Chazelle's a Trump voter.
No,
although that movie's treatment of race is significantly whack, and we can
reactionary,
into the extreme. I love particularly when he runs into the old black couple on the pier who are quiet, and he just kind of spins the old lady around and then just keeps singing his stupid song. And it's just like, but anyway, it's that idea that like reactionary impulses can be encoded even into ostensibly progressive or neutral content.
Yeah.
So I'm watching Juror Number 2. You don't even have to interpret it as conservative because Clint Eastwood is the former Republican mayor of Carmel, California, But I'm also watching that, and my reaction to Juror Number 2 this year is like, God, that feels like a movie, not a series, and not something else. Feels like a movie, and I'm so like spiritually parched for that. I'm just in the tank for it.
Yeah, I get my satiation of that feeling at the film festival, like I go to TIFF and I see like last year I saw 28 movies in 10 days, and I'm like, yes, this is cinema.
this year you mean, or back in 2023?
Last year, yeah. No, this year I only saw 2 films, and they were I saw Nora and The Substance, and I'm kind of waning now on The Substance only after reading criticism and thinking deeply about the movie and how it's just kind of making symbols for the sake of making symbols.
Well, the one thought I have about The Substance, so which you thought was okay?
It was fine.
It's fine. Is that this idea of trying to take something older and then create a yassified version of it, which is what that movie is.
Yeah, right.
This is how genre cinema works now. So you have David Cronenberg's movie, The Shrouds, which is the best thing I saw at TIFF.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And
I can't wait to watch that.
David Cronenberg is a great filmmaker. I mean, when he started, he was scary to people, and people criticized him for his government funding, and his movies are disgusting and pornographic. Now he's a monument, and he should be. But what every hip genre film distributor wants now, or every distributor wants is hip, I should say every distributor wants hip genre movies. They want things made in Cronenberg's image because the original's too old. So all the filmmakers...
Too old for who, though?
Too old for the idea.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Too old for the idea of a fan culture, a movie fan culture, an auteur worship culture who wants... And these aren't filmmakers I'm putting down. Some of these are filmmakers I like very much, some of them. But, they want Ari Aster, they want Robert Eggers, or they want Corley Farshout, or they want Julia Ducournau, who made Titane. And by the way, these filmmakers are not dishonest.
Yeah,
when Julia Ducournau won the Palme d'Or for Titane, she says, I love David Cronenberg. And my answer to that, we all do.
Yeah.
But she wins a Palme.
And like also no shit.
Yeah,
right?
no shit. But I mean, and Titane I like more after watching The Substance, because I think The Substance is quite bad. And I know it's a pernicious link between them, and that they're just like French horror movies directed by women, but they also both had huge splashes at Cannes. Watching both of those movies, I just remembered that a filmmaker who I revere, who's actually my favorite living director, Claire Denis, when she made Trouble Every Day, and that played at Cannes in 2001 as a kind of French body horror movie conflating gore and sex with a really poetic aesthetic, she got run out of town.
Yeah.
And that's not because Trouble Every Day isn't good. It's very good. It's great, in fact. It's better than The Substance and Titane put together times 10, all that stuff. But it just wasn't the right moment. So the part of me that believes in things like fairness is like, why should the innovations of filmmakers in the late 90s, early 2000s, go unrewarded at the time, and then later on these inheritors, they're like their substance. Yeah, they are the younger, hipper, anodyne versions of those directors. They don't improve on them. They replicate them in a kind of packaged way.
Yeah.
And in that sense, The Substance is an incredible allegory about film culture, even if it's not much of a movie. It's incredibly load-bearing as an allegory. I would say that it's maybe in that sense, that and Deadpool and Wolverine are the two movies of the year for me because of what they say, not because I enjoyed watching them.
So we're on phase 2 of The Substance. What happens when we get Eliza Sue or whatever?
That's so well said. I hadn't even thought of articulating it that way. But what happens when we get Eliza Sue? You know, are people going to applaud or are they going to, you know, run screaming? I mean, it's always a mutation and an evolution.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I really do think, because I've tried to think on it for the last few months, and I think Deadpool Wolverine was the thing I watched where I thought, this is probably the movie I've seen this year made by the smartest people, even though I think morally and artistically they're idiots.
Yeah.
And I hated every minute of watching it. And I'm not a priori opposed to comic book movies. My 4-year-old daughter now is getting like obsessed with the idea of the Avengers. So I keep showing her clips from the first phase Marvel movies. I'm like, these were all pretty fun. I mean, we didn't know how shitty the world was going to get. It was already pretty crappy.
Yeah.
But in 2008, watching Iron Man and being like, this is an Obama allegory, you guys maybe feel good about that allegory. Not anymore. But I watched Deadpool and Wolverine and I'm like, wow, they figured it out. They figured out, to loop back to the beginning of our conversation, this is about brand fealty and being fed slop and being grateful for that slop. Yeah. And the person handing you the slop says, here's some slop, you moron. You like the slop? There it is.
Here, piggy.
Piggy, you eat the slop. And there's something about the way Ryan Reynolds, who I think is an enemy of art at this point, just like a straight up enemy of art.
Yeah.
You know, he's thrown in with all the worst parts of film culture. He's thrown in with the Russos. He's thrown in with Netflix. Yeah. He makes movies with Gal Gadot and The Rock and all these other people without brain cells to scrape together about the work that they make. Him as the ringmaster of this is perfect.
Yeah.
Where he just looks at the camera and he's like, you know, don't expect better.
Oh, it's so flaunting and like, it's
and I'm
insulting, honestly.
But I'm impressed by it.
Yeah.
And I think that as Deadpool, because Ryan Reynolds is an actor who I really enjoyed a long time ago in all the vulgar comedies he was in. I really like, you know, Van Wilder, and I like him in Harold and Kumar. And I think
Mississippi Grind.
He's good in that, and I really and there's a movie he's in that it's one of the only pieces I've ever been truly totally happy with that I've ever written was something on the movie Adventureland for Reverse Shot.
Oh
with
yeah.
Jesse Eisenberg and Kristen Stewart and Ryan Reynolds. I think a wonderful coming of age comedy. Yeah. I think it's a 5-star movie. But Reynolds as Deadpool, this is the tour de force of his career. He's brilliant in this part in a way that again is not a compliment. It's hateful. And if you look at that movie and go, well, you're just supposed to enjoy it, I'm going, no, you are just supposed to enjoy it.
Right.
So what are you enjoying? You're watching Disney narrate a victory lap about buying Fox. That's the plot of the movie.
Yes, like literally.
That's not like the deep Sontagian or J. Hobermanian read of a movie and reading it against the grain. It's what it's about. The plot of the movie is, oh my God, we bought Fox.
We have a new franchise.
We have a new franchise. Here's our intellectual property that we can reanimate the corpses of and give you everything that you ever wanted while making fun of giving it to you.
Alien did that too, I think, by literally reanimating a corpse with AI, and I thought that was like kind of in the same vein.
Oh, I mean, Alien Romulus is vile. It's a terrible movie.
Yeah.
And I care more about the Alien universe than I do about the Marvel universe.
Me too.
but they are both things that I recognize the phantom stirrings of real pleasure I still want to have from them.
Yeah, right.
Because none of us are made of stone.
Right.
And I think that the moment in the first Avengers where the camera circles around the 6th of the New York, which carries the subtext of all the movies you've paid to see have now come together in this 7th movie. And they didn't invent this idea, but it articulates it very clearly where each of them kind of is in the circular camera and you're like, I saw that person's movie and I saw that person's movie. Cool. They're all in one movie now. I can't wait to see more movies with these people. Deadpool and Wolverine takes what's already very clear about that and just like enacts it to the highest degree while also completely mocking it and completely mocking you for being bound up in that idea of interlocking whatever. And I love that the night after I saw Deadpool and Wolverine, on the 9th day of a 10-day trip with my wife to the East Coast, because after 8 or 9 days of wonderful time alone without our kids and sightseeing, I'm like, I got to go see a movie. So I drove down like 10 minutes from our hotel on the highway in PEI to go see Deadpool at a mall.
Right. Which they're probably still playing.
But the morning after that screening was when it was literally the morning after because I didn't see it on opening weekend.
Right.
Because I was on a wonderful vacation in nature, But the morning after was when Robert Downey Jr. unmasked at the Comic-Con, and all the emotion that was bound up, ostensibly, because I did not give a shit when they killed him in whichever Avengers movie it was. And then I love the whole Marvel Universe is at his funeral, and there's like 800 people. And I'm like, there's too many people in these movies. When they killed Robert Downey Jr. Then the next morning, like, oh, Robert Downey's back. And when he unmasked, I don't know if anyone here is a pro wrestling fan, but it reminded me of when they showed that Vince McMahon was like the higher power in that angle. And everyone's like, well, of course. It's not a surprise. It's the same shitty bad guy. Like, of course Robert Downey Jr. came back because he campaigned and won an Oscar on the idea that he's past Marvel and he doesn't want to make this crap anymore and he's a serious artist. Then he comes back with this shit-eating grin under a hood to be Dr. Doom and get paid another $100 million. And it's like, that's $100 million. It's obscene that any one actor's going to be paid that for anything, but especially cashing in and all the fake sentiment that these movies were supposed to be over. All you have to know about the Marvel movies is you had a villain who could kill everybody with half a finger snap. Movie never seriously investigated the extent to which he kind of made points, that character, that bad guy, but overcrowding, resources, whatever. But they just want to bring everybody back because you can't lose the franchises. So I love that the absolute assholes who made that movie, the Russos, were like, this is like Antonioni. You know, we're trying to make an art film. We're trying to make a comic movie with art house properties. It's about fatalism and nihilism and all that stuff. No, it's not. You end the world and bring everybody back. How does this allegory help us?
Yeah.
We're in a world where we're going to lose half the people. They're not going to be brought back, you know? Here's a movie about undoing all of this apocalyptic subtext with magical thinking because you just don't want to lose the franchise.
Yeah.
So then you finally kill somebody off. You finally kill Robert Downey Jr. off to tell these kids and maybe these teenagers and these adult teenagers and this completely infantilized film-going culture that just wants this slop. There's some consequences finally. We're going to kill somebody. He's back. And when he came back and unmasked on stage with the Russos, I had this moment 12 hours after seeing Deadpool versus Wolverine where I thought, okay, here's where we live. This is where we live now. And it's hell. This is like living in some version of hell. And Robert Downey Jr. has gone in 15 years from galvanizing how superhero movies work by being so charming and personable and pushing against the machinery of comic book movies. His whole performance in Iron Man has this whole tone of like, I don't really want to be here. Do you really want to be here? I guess we're here. Let's have fun, you know? To now unmasking as the bad guy. Not just that he's coming back, that he's coming back as a supervillain. Like, you can't write this stuff. It's just
too real.
Too real. Too perfect.
I want to finish off with some rapid fire questions, if that's okay. What is your favorite Coen Brothers line delivery?
My favorite Coen Brothers line delivery. I think it is F. Murray Abraham and Inside Llewyn Davis saying, I don't see a lot of money here.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. I'll give my answer as well.
Please.
I think he thinks that's a Schwinn. Is probably my favorite Brad Pitt.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe also Michael Stuhlbarg in A Serious Man, where he meets with the secretary and he's trying to justify meeting with the rabbi because he's trying to build himself up as having like the kind of cred that deserves an audience.
Yeah.
And it ends up just descending into this insane babbling where it's not full sentences. And he says, "My kids, a good breakfast." And I think that's right there too.
Okay, that's great. What's a movie you've still put off watching?
Oh, that's a really good question. What's a movie that I've still put off watching?
Preferably like not a new release.
No.
You know what I mean? Like something that's just been lingering over your head that you still haven't seen.
What have I never seen? I have never seen a movie that figures very prominently in Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans. I've never seen The Greatest Show on Earth.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which won Best Picture in 1952. I have very received ideas about that movie. The problem is that when your life involves monetizing what you've watched in every direction, you tend to seek things out. And while I consider myself a well-adjusted person, and your listenership should know that I've done lots of normal things in my life, like play basketball and have girlfriends and, parent, I have seen a lot of movies. And
that's why I like movies was so relatable.
A lot of blind spots covered off a long time ago.
I'd say, like, as of 2 days ago, this isn't true anymore, but this would have been my answer, is Ivan's Childhood, because I'm a huge Tarkovsky fan, and my dad grew up in the Soviet Union, so he kind of introduced me to these films. And
what did you think?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, I was putting it off and putting it off. Ironically, my last Tarkovsky film I haven't seen was his first feature length.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I finally watched it, and I thought it was great. Now it's probably The Thin Red Line. I still haven't seen that. Like, I want to go through Terrence Malick, and I still haven't seen that.
I was listening on the way over here to the second to last Vampire Weekend album, Father of the Bride.
Oh, nice.
And I always forget that the first song with him and Alana Haim, I'm being Jewish, samples the music, the score from Thin Red Line.
Oh, really?
And,
yeah, I didn't know that.
In the middle of Hold You Now, the music from Thin Red Line comes in, and I'm like, I want to watch Thin Red Line. So we are aligned here. I'm going to rewatch it.
What's your favorite song off the new Vampire Weekend album?
I like Prep School Gangsters.
Yeah, me too.
A lot. I saw them play at the amphitheater, or what's it called
now? Budweiser stage?
Budweiser stage a few weeks ago.
Nice.
And the only tweet I had about that whole concert was, look at all the movie tote bags.
Oh, yeah. So funny.
A lot of movie tote bags at Vampire Weekend. Best Vampire Weekend song title, by the way, is, of course, Unbearably White, because they know.
Yeah.
They know what they're putting out there and what people say about it. And, they're both not wrong, and doesn't mean that they're innocent of it.
Right.
But smart guys, getting smarter.
Yeah.
I think Ezra Koenig, very smart guy.
Yeah, their newest album is my favorite for sure.
It's very good.
And same favorite song. Who is a director that has yet to release their magnum opus?
In a good way or a bad way?
Both. How about explain what you mean, and then I'd say give both your answers.
I mean, magnum opus is a scary word. We have to leave the magnum opuses to the people who we can trust with them.
Yeah, right.
I think that Brady Corbet is a filmmaker who's trying every time to make a magnum opus, and I think this may be it.
Okay.
I do think that there are some directors who are very promising and who may yet make a good movie out of that promise. Like, for instance, and I don't know if he'll end up listening to this because I say it with respect, but he's someone who I know a little bit. I've now seen the 3 Ari Aster features, and each of them has things in it that I like. I'm very on the record writing about them and being kind of ambivalent, which doesn't mean I don't think he's a good filmmaker or that he's not an interesting sensibility.
Yeah.
But I think that when I think about Hereditary and Midsommar and Beau is Afraid, all of which I like more than a lot of my friends and less than a lot of people who interact with each other online, because they see these as the second coming of whatever. I think Ari has a really great start to finish, fully realized movie in him, which I'm really, looking forward to see. And I'll tell you who else might surprise you in terms of someone who I think, not a newish filmmaker. But
the Russos. No, I'm kidding.
No, I don't want magnum opuses from them. No, and this is a weird one, and it made me think of it when I saw her last movie. I think there is a great movie left in Sofia Coppola.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that there's elements of The Beguiled and On the Rocks and Priscilla where all the things that are good about her movies are there, and the configuration, at least for me, I'm only speaking for myself, there's something off in each of those movies. I think she still has it in her to make something great, and I would really like to see her connect to some unexpected material, as opposed to stuff that feels tailor-made for her, which Priscilla was.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes you can only see those tensions in retrospect, but I would love to see Sofia Coppola make something that builds on what's been like 20 years of real promise, and just to make something really great.
I see. Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this age of like digital filmmaking that also relates to the internet. Internet culture. I don't know, like Spring Breakers comes to mind, but also the Bling Ring, like just this aesthetic. I see the good movie in the Bling Ring, actually.
I like the soundtrack to the Bling Ring.
Yeah,
I think the soundtrack's good. And there's one incredible shot of it, of like a house that you see like from a really, really far distance. Yeah. It's like the house becomes kind of, miniaturized. But I mean, I like your question about magnum opuses because you know, this is now how every film kind of has to be sold. Or if people make a small movie, it's like, when are they going to kind of graduate to the big one?
Well, yeah, I guess so.
I mean, a fun question might be, who is a magnum opus style filmmaker who would be nice to see locked in a room and have to make something inventive?
For like $100,000.
Yeah, and my answer to that is someone who started that way, which is, I need someone to airlift Sam Raimi out of the Marvel universe.
Yeah, and start making practical VFX gore, like Brain Dead and...
I'm stealing an observation from a friend here, but when I saw the Doctor Strange sequel and Raimi was doing his stuff, it's like that scene in the zombie movie where they're like, you have to shoot them. They're not your parents anymore. You know, they're reanimated. They're not people anymore, Bobby. You got to shoot them. And I'm like, Sam Raimi has a lifetime pass for me. He made Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 and Darkman. He could kidnap my family, and I would be like, you know, Darkman's really good. But I don't like seeing him get to do his stuff. You know, it's like a wrestler who gets 5 minutes in a match to do their stuff and get tossed out.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see Sam Raimi make something small again. And the last time he made something smallish, which was Drag Me to Hell, not coincidentally, pretty good late capitalist allegory with good gore and a funny ending. You know, so like make Sam Raimi great again.
Okay, on a final, my final question. Let's end it on a wholesome note. You've mentioned before that both of your parents were journalists growing up, and that your mom had influenced your cinemaphile like tastes as a kid. What would be your mom's favorite movie?
Oh man, Evelyn, what's your favorite movie? You know, it's funny. My mom loves The Serious Man, but I think that the movie I most associate with my mom is a movie called The Heiress, which is directed by William Wyler. It's an adaptation of Henry James Washington Square, and here's why it's a big movie in our household. There's a sweet anecdote to end on. I've written on it elsewhere, but I like it a lot. When I was a kid, my mom would rent VHSs from the Toronto Public Library, and she went out to rent The Heiress, which was certainly not for me. She was renting it because like my dad was out of town working. He worked for CBC. And the next morning, she told us, my brother and I, that instead of The Heiress, the movie that had been put in the case was The Terminator. You know, the original Terminator, the James Cameron film. And she's like, this is very good. So my brother and I were allowed to watch The Terminator at a young age. And when T2 came out, my mom took me to the theater, and they were
She took you to see Heiress?
She took me to see T2. T2 came out, and then they were like, you can't let the kid in. She's like, it's my kids. You know, I got to see T2 in the theater. Right. And the reason we love this is not just because, you know, my mom found all the. By the way, your favorite director, Andrei Tarkovsky, big Terminator fan.
Oh, really?
I wrote about the Terminator recently for The Ringer, and Tarkovsky was like, this is an incredible vision of, you know, a mechanized apocalypse. He really liked the movie.
Yeah, well.
But so it's not just that we like the Terminators. We have always wondered about the dudes, because film bros existed before A24. You know, who are the dudes who went to the library, pre-DVD, pre-whatever, to rent the Terminator, and they got The Heiress?
Right.
Did they all like go to someone's basement and, you know, like order pizza, and then they put in the disc, the tape, and it's like Olivia de Havilland in black and white and Montgomery Clift? Like, did they fall in love with William Wyler and deep focus cinematography? And I think that what my mom taught me is that not that The Heiress and the Terminator are the same thing, but that you can kind of love both of them.
Yeah.
And also you can kind of rewatch both of them. So these are movies that she doesn't just like. I know that she's probably seen The Heiress and the Terminator each, you know, 10 times each. And I've certainly seen the Terminator at least 10 times. So, yeah, I take that from her.
So 2 quick points. My mom's favorite movie is The Big Short.
Right on.
And then I was going to say I grew up, you know, or developed my cinema tastes in an era of unprecedented discovery and accessibility to film.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, sailing the high seas, you know what I mean? So, like, if the studios don't make these films accessible, I'm going to find them. And this era of absolute discoverability and accessibility in film, thanks to, you know, peer-to-peer file sharing, made me who I am today. And, like, also, YouTube growing up, what I didn't realize until I started reading your reviews and thinking about, like, the language of cinema and how this through line of all the things that I grew up watching, which was YouTube video essays and Newgrounds. Do you know what Newgrounds is? Mm-hmm. Newgrounds digital animations and that sort of thing. Making this through line through like, and also like web series, you know, like Whitest Kids You Know and Nirvana the band The Show, like.
We could do a whole other podcast about Matt Johnson.
Yeah, Matt Johnson's great, but I'm just thinking about like this digital through line that has informed my current taste, and it's so different from the video store. I can see how different I would come out if I had been raised in a video store rather than the internet.
I think it's a really smart observation. I think that one of the unreleased movies from the last year that I really wish would get programmed somewhere, Alex Ross Perry made a documentary called Video Heaven. I wrote about it in the last issue of CinemaScope, and it was a fun movie to write about because it wasn't out yet. It's still not out. So it's kind of writing about a movie that's not seen. And don't get too excited, everyone listening to this. It's a 3-hour voiceover documentary about the history of video stores.
Wow.
And sort of especially, not the rise and fall so much, but like the rise and plateau and then the gentle erosion heading into the streaming era. And it is one of the greatest, it's based on Los Angeles Plays itself, the Tom Anderson film about Los Angeles as a cinematic city. That's the stylistic template. It is such an incredible movie about how video stores got figured in the public imagination. Because to be clear, this is not a movie about video stores. It's like, here's the history of Blockbuster. It's how were video stores seen in movies and TV.
Oh, wow.
A lot of sitcoms.
Yeah,
and
right.
a lot of like, what does it mean to go to the video store? And it's like, I want to rent a dumb action movie, but this nerdy guy behind the counter, he wants me to watch a foreign film. What does this cute girl want to watch? Or lots of indie movies where the video store is kind of where like the hipster person works. And, you know, you can extrapolate into something like High Fidelity, which is
the
a
record
music
store, right?
The record store. And that idea that like the local nerd used to be someone who you kind of went to visit. And now we are all our own local nerd, but without a local nerd to guide us.
Well, the culture is so atomized, right? And it's
the culture is so
individualized.
So what nerds do we turn to?
Right,
and unfortunately,
only ourselves.
Only ourselves, or the nerds we turn to tend to also be the people who are telling us, you know, maybe sexual orientation is mental illness, and maybe people shouldn't have rights. But as long as it's Joe Rogan, who's a beloved sitcom actor, telling you these things, it's easier to swallow. Although, you know, the swastikas are becoming more and more visible on some of these things, but these things are not separate.
Yeah.
Right. That in a way, what Tarantino represents and what Matt Johnson represents and what a lot of these filmmakers represent, despite their good qualities, is it is the revenge of the video store nerd.
Right.
That in Clerks, the people who are obsessed with Star Wars and watch porn, they are safely contained behind the counter at the convenience store. Now they're everywhere. And Tarantino, who grew up as a video store clerk talking to people, but here's all the crazy shit I've watched, then he's like, I'm going to just redo that shit on a big budget. And turn everybody into a little version of me. And the nice thing about Quentin Tarantino in 1994 is there was one of him. When the culture is made in Tarantino's image, literacy, film literacy, cultural literacy is through the roof. I don't know what like moral literacy looks like or what just an ability to hear anybody else looks like, because Tarantino's preferred form of communication is the monologue. His movies are filled with characters talking endlessly. They don't talk to each other. That's Tarantino. So I see a lot of the stuff that's happened in the podcast sphere, whether it's about movies, is really analogous to what's happened in the podcast sphere as a people where people get radicalized.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wish radical cinephilia to me looked more like radical left-wing cinephilia, but to me it looks more like kind of radical passivity. And please don't say that what I like is bad. And if you say what I like is bad, then, you know.
You're my enemy.
You're my enemy. And, you know, you're also probably woke and queer and all that other stuff. Because that's the attitude that comes through. And if you say that about someone specifically, that's slander. If you say it generally about a vibe, and we are nothing if not at a vibes-based moment, that's the vibe.
Yeah.
Not a good vibe.
Right. Okay, that's a great place to end off on. Thank you so much for joining me, Professor Nayman.
Absolutely. I had a great time. Thank you.
Okay, awesome.